Hi, Erikkieser here, the conflict guru, talking more about what I consider to be the essentials for healthy and safe conflict. In my last video, I talked about reflective listening, just the basic ability to summarize what you're hearing someone say, especially in the heat of conflict. I still think it's the most essential skill you can have, and it's so useful at de-escalating conflict. This is number two, something most people call ground rules. And if you're not familiar with ground rules in conflict, think of them as the rules in a sports event or a game, basketball, football, boxing, martial arts, whatever. You can't play those games if you don't have some rules. You certainly can't play them safely if you don't have some rules. Same thing for conflict. Conflict rules, ground rules, can make conflict really safe and productive, even when things get heated or intense. Without ground rules, and I'm going to argue for a lot of people, this is why conflict goes sideways, because they don't have basic ground rules to make it work. Okay, so there are some things to consider what ground rules will do for you. One, they provide boundaries. Like I said with a sports team, you can be clear where behavior works and where it doesn't work for either or both of you. It makes people feel safe in the first place to even do conflict. If I know, for instance, that yelling makes me crazy and I go irrational if someone yells at me, and we have a ground rule that says, okay, no yelling, I'm a lot more likely to participate than I am without that ground rule. It gives people a way to get out of the water when the water gets too deep. Conflict is an emotional experience. More about that in a later blog post. But if we can't find safe ways to extricate ourselves briefly, give ourselves a little bit of breathing room, it can be hard to stay in the game. Finally, more than anything else, ground rules provide a structure. I have a sense of how I can move in this discussion, the ways that interact best for you and I when we're having this conflict. So I'm kind of sneaking up on conflict when I say this next thing. You've obviously got to agree to these rules before you have the conflict. It means you got to negotiate them with the person you're going to wrestle with. This is probably obvious when it comes to married couples or long-term relationships, but this applies to work or any other place where you're in a significant and long-term relationship where you need to have the capacity to do conflict if it comes up. All right, so what are some examples of ground rules? Hey, that's the easy part. There's a lot of examples. One of my favorites is, to refer to my earlier video, we must do reflective listening, which means if we get heated, one or the other of us has to start going, okay, this is what I'm hearing you say. It's a great ground rule. One. Two, one of my favorites is no insults, no nasty words, no saying names to each other. That works for me, certainly. And I'm the kind of guy that can get a little mean if I'm not careful because I'm angry. So it's a good rule for me, and it's a good rule for the other person when they're talking about interacting with me. Another good example is something people call I language. It's always better to make the conflict about me in terms of what it is I'm experiencing. So if I say, you make me crazy, that's an accusation, and it's almost certain to make somebody feel defensive. If I say, sometimes when we're having our arguments, I get a little crazy because of this thing you might say, or because I don't feel like I'm getting enough eye contact with you. So I'm making it about myself, not about the other person. Another example might be this argument shouldn't go any longer than 20 minutes. And if we go longer, we're going to take a break. And speaking of breaks, one great ground rule is if it becomes too much, you can always call a timeout. Give me 5 minutes, I'll take a walk around the block, we'll come back and do this again. These are just some basic examples of ground rules. And in my next video, I'm going to walk through these in more detail. But the bottom line is this: healthy conflict is really assisted by having some basic ground rules that you've already negotiated so you know how the game can be played once you're in it. All right, see you next time.